Gabriella Cooper had always been a head above the rest, 6 feet and 4 inches of unwavering confidence, despite the sideways glances and hushed whispers that followed her through the dusty streets of Kingman, Arizona. The year was 1883, and in a world where women were expected to be dainty flowers waiting to be plucked by suitable gentlemen, Gabriella stood like a sunflower among daisies impossible to ignore and too tall for conventional beauty. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Kingman as Gabriella made her way toward the general store, her auburn hair piled high atop her head, making her appear even taller. She'd long ago stopped hunching her shoulders to appear shorter. What was the point? At 25 years old, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood after countless courtships ended with men feeling diminished beside her towering frame. "Miss Cooper," called Mr. Jenkins from behind the counter as she ducked through the doorway of his establishment. "Got that order of fabrics you've been waiting on, though I reckon you'll need more than most for those dresses of yours." Gabriella offered a practiced smile. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I appreciate you ordering the extra yardage." She'd learned to sew her own clothing years ago, standard women's, where simply didn't fit her long limbs. She was examining a bolt of blue calico when the bell above the door jingled. The store fell silent as a stranger entered, a tall man with broad shoulders, though still a good 2 inches shorter than Gabriella. His face was weathered from the sun, with deep-set eyes that took in the store with a careful gaze. A gun belt hung low on his hips, not unusual for these parts, but the way he carried himself suggested he knew how to use it. "Afternoon," he nodded to Mr. Jenkins, then his eyes fell on Gabriella. Unlike most men who quickly averted their gaze when confronted with her height, this one let his eyes travel upward until they met hers. A slow smile spread across his face. "Finally," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "someone I can reach for." Gabriella felt heat rise to her cheeks. Never in her life had a man acknowledged her height as something desirable rather than a flaw to be tolerated. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. "This here's Miss Cooper." "And you would be Mason Fitzgerald," the stranger replied, his eyes never leaving Gabriella's. "Just rode in from Santa Fe. Looking to settle in these parts if the welcome's warm enough." "Mr. Fitzgerald," Gabriella nodded formally, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. "What brings you to Kingman?" "Cattle business," he said. "Heard there's good grazing land available south of town, and please call me Mason." "I'm afraid I haven't been properly introduced to you, Mr. Fitzgerald, so that would hardly be appropriate," she replied, though the corner of her mouth twitched upward. Mason's smile widened. "Then I hope someone remedies that situation soon, Miss Cooper." He tipped his hat and turned to Mr. Jenkins to inquire about supplies. Gabriella gathered her purchases quickly, suddenly aware of how the other patrons were watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Kingman might be growing with the arrival of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, but it was still small enough that gossip spread faster than desert wildfire. "Good day, Mr. Jenkins," she said, heading for the door. As she passed Mason, he shifted slightly, standing at his full height, which brought his eyes level with her chin. "Hope to see you around town, Miss Cooper," he said quietly. "Kingman isn't very large, Mr. Fitzgerald. I imagine our paths will cross again." Outside, Gabriella took a deep breath of the dry Arizona air. 25 years of being the tallest woman in any room had taught her caution. Men either saw her as a curiosity or a challenge. This Mason Fitzgerald had the confident air of a man who enjoyed challenges, and she wasn't about to become his latest conquest. Yet as she walked home, her mind kept returning to his words. "Finally, someone I can reach for." As if her height was exactly what he'd been searching for all along. Gabriella lived on the outskirts of town in a modest house left to her by her parents, who had both succumbed to influenza 3 years prior. The house sat on a small plot of land with a vegetable garden she tended herself, and a few chickens that provided eggs. Her income came from the seamstress work she did for the townsfolk, a skill her mother had taught her that proved invaluable given her unique proportions. As she approached her home, she spotted a figure on her porch, her friend Louisa, the schoolteacher and one of the few people in town who treated Gabriella's height as unremarkable. "You'll never guess what happened at the mercantile," Gabriella said by way of greeting. Louisa raised an eyebrow. "From the color in your cheeks, I'd say you either got into an argument or met a man, the latter, a newcomer named Mason Fitzgerald." Gabriella unlocked her door and ushered Louisa inside. "He commented on my height." "Oh dear, what tactless remark did he make?" Gabriella hesitated. "That's just it. He said I was finally someone he could reach for, as if he appreciated it." Louisa's eyes widened. "Well, that's certainly a new approach. What's he like? Tall, though not as tall as me." Gabriella busied herself putting away her purchases. "Handsome in a rugged sort of way. He said he's looking to start a cattle operation south of town. The old Henderson place has been vacant since the family moved to California. Good grazing land from what I hear." Louisa watched her friend carefully. "You seem intrigued by him." "Nonsense. I've merely had my fill of men who either mock my height or pretend not to notice it. His straightforwardness was refreshing, that's all. Hum. Louisa's knowing smile made Gabriella turn away to hide her own. "Well, if he's planning to stay in Kingman, I'm sure you'll be seeing more of him." Over the next week, Gabriella did indeed see more of Mason Fitzgerald. She spotted him at the land office, talking with several ranch hands at the saloon, though he didn't appear to be drinking, and loading supplies into a wagon. Each time, he greeted her with the same appreciative gaze and warm smile. On Sunday after church, Reverend Thompson was introducing Mason to various members of the congregation when they reached Gabriella. "And this is Miss Gabriella Cooper, one of our most talented seamstresses," the Reverend said. "We've met," Mason said, extending his hand. "Miss Cooper." Gabriella placed her hand in his, surprised at how naturally they fit together despite the height difference. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I hear you've purchased the Henderson property." "News travels fast in Kingman," he replied. "Yes, I closed the deal yesterday. I'll be moving my herd up from New Mexico next month once I've got the place suitable." "That's quite an undertaking for one man," she observed. "I've hired some good hands, and I'm not afraid of hard work." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Actually, I was hoping to commission some work from you. The previous owner left some curtains, but they are in poor condition. The house needs a woman's touch before it feels like a proper home." "I'd be happy to assist," Gabriella said carefully. "If you'd like to call at my home tomorrow afternoon, we can discuss the details." "I'll bring measurements," he promised. As he walked away, Louisa appeared at Gabriella's side. Well, house curtains. That's a transparent excuse if I ever heard one. Don't be ridiculous. He's new in town and needs a seamstress." And of all the seamstresses in Kingman, he chose the tallest one. Louisa grinned. "How convenient." Despite her protests, Gabriella spent extra time the next day tidying her home and brewing fresh coffee in anticipation of Mason's visit. She just changed into a clean dress, a dark green that complemented her auburn hair when a knock sounded at her door. Mason stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking surprisingly nervous. "Miss Cooper, thank you for receiving me. Please come in, Mr. Fitzgerald." She gestured to her small parlor. "Would you care for some coffee? That would be mighty kind." He followed her inside, ducking slightly through the doorway, though there was no need. Gabriella poured coffee for them both, using her best cups. When she turned, she found him examining a portrait on her mantel. "My parents," she explained. "They passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," he said with genuine sympathy. "My own parents are gone as well. Father died in the war and mother followed a few years later. It's not easy being alone." "No, it's not," she agreed, offering him coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and again she noticed how he didn't seem bothered by the size of her hands, which had always made her self-conscious. They sat across from each other, and Mason pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I've brought the window measurements as promised. 7 windows in all, 2 in the parlor, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in each of the 3 bedrooms and 1 in the study. 3 bedrooms, that's quite a house for a single man. I have plans to fill it someday," he said, looking directly at her, "with a family of my own." Gabriella felt that flutter again but kept her expression neutral. "And what sort of curtains did you have in mind?" They discussed fabrics and designs, and Gabriella quoted him a fair price for the work. Business concluded, she expected him to leave, but he lingered over his coffee. "Miss Cooper, I hope you'll forgive my directness, but I've been wanting to ask, would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner this Friday evening?" The invitation caught her off guard. "Dinner?" "Yes, at the hotel restaurant. I know it's not as fancy as what you might find in Phoenix, but I hear Mrs. Hollister is an excellent cook." Gabriella hesitated. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I must ask, is this invitation extended out of genuine interest or curiosity? I'm well acquainted with men who see me as a novelty." Mason set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "Miss Cooper, Gabriella, if I may, I assure you my interest is entirely genuine. I find you not only beautiful but refreshingly forthright. And yes, I admire your height. Where I come from, it's considered a blessing to stand tall." His honesty disarmed her. "Then I accept your invitation, Mr. Fitzgerald." "Mason, please." "Mason," she conceded with a smile. Friday arrived with a flurry of nerves Gabriella hadn't experienced since her first dance as a young woman. She chose a blue dress that accentuated her eyes and arranged her hair in a style that didn't add much to her height. Practical concerns most women never considered. Mason arrived promptly at 6, dressed in a clean suit that showed off his broad shoulders. When Gabriella opened the door, he let out a low whistle of appreciation. "Miss Cooper, you look absolutely stunning." "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Mason." He offered his arm, and they walked toward the hotel in the center of town. Gabriella was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. She was used to being noticed, but now they were being observed as a pair. The height difference was noticeable, but not as dramatic as it might have been with a shorter man. The hotel restaurant had tables covered in white cloths and a small vase of wildflowers on each. The maitre d' showed them to a corner table that offered some privacy from curious onlookers. Once seated, Mason ordered a bottle of wine. "I hope that's acceptable." "Quite," she replied. "Though I should warn you I rarely indulge, so 1 glass will be my limit." "A woman who knows her limits. I admire that." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings in Kingman." They clinked glasses, and Gabriella found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. Mason was well-spoken and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about her life and sharing stories of his own time working cattle drives across the Southwest. "What brought you to Arizona Territory?" she asked as they enjoyed slices of apple pie. "I've been moving around since I was 18. Texas, Colorado, New Mexico. Never felt settled anywhere, but I'm 30 now and I reckon it's time to put down roots." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you? Ever thought of leaving Kingman?" "I considered it after my parents died. My aunt in San Francisco offered me a place in her home. But this is where I grew up. My friends are here, My business is established, she shrugged. And to be honest, I've found that people's reactions to my height are much the same everywhere. Not everyone's reaction, Mason said softly. After dinner, he walked her home through the quiet streets. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the desert sky. When they reached her porch, Gabriella found herself reluctant for the evening to end. I had a wonderful time, she said, as did I. Mason took her hand. May I call on you again? I'd like that. He hesitated, then slowly raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Gabriella. As she watched him walk away, Gabriella realized she hadn't once thought about their height difference all evening. For the first time in her adult life, she'd been simply a woman enjoying the company of a man who appreciated her. Over the next few weeks, Mason became a regular visitor at Gabriella's home. He would often arrive with small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered from the prairie, once even a length of imported silk that must have cost him dearly. They would sit on her porch in the evenings, talking as the sun set over the Hualapai Mountains. Meanwhile, Gabriella worked on the curtains for Mason's ranch house, which he'd named Fitzgerald Station. The property was located 10 miles south of town, and Mason invited her to come see it once she'd finished the curtains. It's not much to look at yet, he admitted. Still needs a lot of work. But I'd value your opinion on the place. The opportunity came in early October. Mason arrived in a buckboard wagon to collect Gabriella and the completed curtains. The day was pleasantly warm, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to go on forever. I've never been out to the Fitzgerald property before, Gabriella said as they left town behind. It's good grazing land. Not as many trees as I'd like, but there's a creek that runs year-round, which is worth its weight in gold out here. Mason guided the horses with practiced ease. Been working on the house most days. Hired some men from town to help with repairs. Wanted to get it in decent shape before my cattle arrive next week. As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. A 2-story house stood in a small clearing with a barn and corral nearby. Men were working on a new fence line in the distance. It's lovely, Gabriella said genuinely. The house was larger than she'd expected, painted white with a wraparound porch. Mason helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong around her waist. The momentary closeness sent a rush of warmth through her. Let me show you around, he said, offering his arm. Inside, the house was simple but spacious. Most rooms had only basic furniture, a table here, a few chairs there, but the floors had been recently polished, and the walls freshly whitewashed. The previous owner left some pieces, Mason explained, but I'll need to get more once I'm properly settled. They went from room to room, hanging curtains and adjusting them to Gabriella's exacting standards. When they reached the master bedroom, she felt a sudden shyness, aware of the intimate nature of the space. The large 4-poster bed dominated the room, though it was currently bare except for a mattress. This is where your curtains will make the most difference, Mason said, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. Morning sun comes right through this window. They worked together to hang the heavier curtains she'd made for this room. As Gabriella stretched to adjust the rod, Mason steadied her with a hand at the small of her back. The touch, though innocent, sent a jolt through her. You have a beautiful home, she said, stepping back to admire their work. It just needs some feminine touches to make it truly comfortable. That's what I was thinking. Mason's voice had gone soft. Gabriella, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Before he could continue, a shout came from outside. Mr. Fitzgerald. The new bulls are here, Mason sighed. Duty calls. Let me show you the rest of the property first, then we can have lunch before heading back to town. The tour continued outside, where Gabriella met the ranch hands, a mix of experienced cowboys and local men eager for steady work. They tipped their hats respectfully, though she noticed several exchanging glances at her height. "Miss Cooper made all the curtains for the house," Mason told them. "Fine work, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," agreed one weathered cowboy. "Place is starting to look like a proper home." After a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, they started back toward town. The afternoon had grown hot, and Gabriella was grateful for her wide-brimmed hat. "What were you going to tell me?" she asked, remembering his interrupted statement. Mason kept his eyes on the road. "Just that I'm grateful for your help with the house. Means a lot to have someone with your eye for detail involved." Gabriella sensed there was more, but didn't press. Instead, she asked about his cattle operation, and Mason spoke enthusiastically about his plans for breeding stock and expanding his grazing lands. As they neared town, he suddenly turned to her. "Would you consider coming to the ranch for Sunday dinner after church? I'm no great cook, but I make a decent stew." "I'd like that very much." Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather. After church services, Mason drove Gabriella back to his ranch, where she was surprised to find the dining table set with a proper tablecloth and what appeared to be new dishes. "Did you buy these for today?" she asked, running a finger along the blue-patterned edge of a plate. Mason looked slightly embarrassed. "Wanted to make a good impression. Mrs. Hollister at the hotel helped me pick them out." The stew was indeed decent beef with potatoes and carrots, served with fresh bread Mason had purchased from the bakery in town. They ate on the porch, enjoying the view of the mountains in the distance. "You have good instincts for this place," Gabriella observed. "Most newcomers underestimate what it takes to survive here. I did my research, spent time with ranchers in similar conditions before investing my savings." Mason leaned back in his chair. "My father always said measure twice, cut once, applies to more than just carpentry." "Your father sounds like a wise man. Would have liked to see this place." A shadow crossed Mason's face. "Lost him at Gettysburg when I was just 11. "I'm sorry," Gabriella said softly. "The war took so many good men." "That it did." Mason was quiet for a moment, then brightened. "But he also taught me to look forward, not back. And right now, the future's looking mighty promising." The way he looked at her left little doubt about what or who he considered promising. After dinner, they walked the property as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. Mason showed her the creek where he planned to build a small reservoir for dry seasons, and the south pasture where wildflowers bloomed in spring. "I imagine it's beautiful then," Gabriella said, trying to picture the brown landscape transformed by color. "You'll have to come see it," Mason replied, then stopped walking. I hope you'll still be visiting come spring." Gabriella turned to face him. In the golden light of sunset, his features were softened, his eyes warm as they met hers. "I'd like that," she said. Mason took a step closer. "Gabriella, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never met anyone like you. Not just because you stand tall, though Lord knows I do admire that, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your strength, the way you face a world that doesn't always know what to make of you with such grace." He took her hands in his. "I find myself thinking about you all the time. When I'm fixing fences or meeting with suppliers or lying awake at night, you're there in my thoughts." Gabriella's heart raced. "I think about you too," she admitted. Mason's smile could have lit up the darkening sky. Slowly, he reached up, truly reaching up to touch her face. "May I kiss you, Gabriella Cooper?" Instead of answering, she leaned down slightly, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle pressure, a hand sliding to the back of her neck to draw her closer. For a woman who had always been told she was too much, too tall, too opinionated, Too independent, the feeling of being wanted exactly as she was overwhelmed her. When they finally broke apart, Mason's eyes were shining. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in Jenkins' store." "You certainly took your time about it," she teased. "Some things are worth waiting for." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Like finding a woman who makes me look up instead of down." The ride back to town that evening was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts about the shift in their relationship. When they reached Gabriella's house, Mason walked her to the door. "I'll be busy with the cattle arriving this week," he said, "but I'd like to take you to the harvest dance on Saturday, if you're amenable." "I am," she replied, "though I should warn you I've stepped on many toes in my dancing days." Mason laughed. "I've got sturdy boots and sturdier feet." "I'm not worried." He kissed her again, briefly but with promise, before returning to his wagon. Gabriella watched him go, touching her lips with her fingers, hardly believing this wasn't some elaborate dream. Inside, she lit a lamp and caught sight of herself in the mirror, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. For the first time in her life, she looked at her height and felt not resignation but pride. Mason saw her tallness as an asset, not a flaw. Maybe it was time she did too. The week passed slowly for Gabriella, filled with sewing work and anticipation for the harvest dance. Louisa visited midweek, full of questions about her blossoming relationship. "The whole town's talking," Louisa reported. "Mrs. Finch swears she saw you two kissing by the creek on his property." Gabriella nearly dropped her teacup. "That's impossible. No one was around when she stopped, realizing she'd confirmed the gossip." "I knew it," Louisa clapped her hands. "Oh, Gabriella, I'm so happy for you. Mason seems like a wonderful man." "He is," Gabriella admitted. "But it's early days yet. We're still getting to know each other." "Well, the dance will certainly give everyone a chance to see you together properly." Louisa's eyes twinkled. "Have you decided what to wear?" The harvest dance was Kingman's largest social event of the year, held in the newly built town hall. Every family for miles around attended, bringing dishes to share and staying late into the night as musicians played lively tunes. Gabriella chose her finest dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. The color complemented her fair skin and made her auburn hair seem to glow in the lamplight. She'd spent extra time on her appearance, wanting to look her best for Mason. He arrived in a black suit with a string tie, his hair neatly combed, and a small bouquet of late-blooming desert flowers in hand. "You are a vision," he said, presenting the flowers with a bow. "And you are extremely handsome," she replied, accepting the bouquet. "These are lovely. Let me put them in water before we go." The town hall was decorated with corn husks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves brought in from the mountains. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a platform had been set up for the musicians, two fiddlers, a man with a banjo and another with a harmonica. When Mason and Gabriella entered, there was a noticeable lull in conversation before it resumed with greater intensity. Gabriella held her head high, used to being the center of attention, though the nature of the stares had changed. Now they were curious, evaluating, perhaps even envious. Mason seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her as he led her to greet various townspeople. He introduced her to the men he'd hired, to suppliers he'd met in his preparations for the ranch, treating her not as an oddity, but as a partner he was proud to have on his arm. As the evening progressed, the band struck up a lively reel and Mason extended his hand. "Shall we dance?" Gabriella hesitated. "I wasn't joking about stepping on toes. It's been years since I've danced. Most men find it awkward." "Most men are fools," he replied simply. "Come on. I'll lead, you follow, and we'll both have a grand time regardless of how many toes get trampled." His confidence was infectious, and Gabriella found herself on the dance floor, one hand in Mason's, the other resting on his shoulder. They moved together surprisingly well. Mason was light on his feet for a cattleman, and Gabriella remembered more of her dancing lessons than she'd thought. They danced 3 songs in succession, laughing when they occasionally misstepped, attracting approving glances from the older couples and whispers from the young women who had previously dismissed Gabriella as a hopeless spinster. During a break in the music, Mason fetched them both punch, and they stepped outside to cool off in the evening air. The stars were out in force, the Milky Way a brilliant swath across the dark sky. "Having a good time?" Mason asked, standing close beside her. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "You're a fine dancer." "Had to learn from my cousin's wedding years back. Never thought I'd be grateful for those lessons until tonight." He touched her elbow lightly. "Gabriella, there's something I want to talk to you about, but not here with half the town watching. Would you ride out to the ranch with me tomorrow afternoon?" The seriousness in his tone gave her pause. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect. I just want some privacy for this particular conversation." Inside, the music started again, a slower waltz this time. Mason offered his hand once more, and they returned to the dance floor. As they moved together in the intimate 3-step rhythm, Gabriella felt the eyes of the town upon them, but for once, she didn't mind. Let them look. Let them see that Gabriella Cooper, the woman they'd whispered was too tall for any man, had found someone who saw her height as a blessing rather than a burden. The next day dawned clear and cool. Gabriella dressed with care, choosing a practical riding skirt and jacket but taking extra time with her hair. Mason arrived just after lunch, riding his own horse and leading a gentle mare for Gabriella. "Thought we might explore more of the property," he explained. "If that suits you." "It does. It's a beautiful day for a ride." They set off toward Fitzgerald Station, Mason pointing out landmarks along the way. The territory around Kingman was stark but beautiful mesas rising from the desert floor, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, occasionally a jackrabbit darting across their path. At the ranch, Mason showed her improvements he'd made since her last visit. The cattle had arrived, a small herd of 30 to start, with plans to expand. They rode past the grazing animals, circled the newly completed reservoir, and finally stopped at a rise overlooking the property. "What do you think?" Mason asked, gesturing to the vista before them. "From this vantage point you can see most of Fitzgerald Station." "It's wonderful," Gabriella said sincerely. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time. Couldn't have done it without good help." Mason dismounted and helped Gabriella down from her horse, though she hardly needed assistance. He tied both horses to a nearby juniper tree, then took her hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led her to a flat boulder perfect for sitting and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This is the deed to the property, 500 acres of good Arizona land." Gabriella looked at the document, unsure why he was showing it to her. "It's an impressive holding. Look at the name." She peered closer and gasped. The deed was made out to Mason Fitzgerald and Gabriella Cooper Fitzgerald. "Mason, what is this?" He took both her hands in his. "Gabriella, I know we haven't known each other long, just 2 months as of yesterday, but I'm not a man who hesitates when he knows what he wants. And what I want is you." He knelt before her, still holding her hands. "I love you, Gabriella Cooper. I love your height, your spirit, your kindness. I love that I have to look up to meet your eyes. I love how you've never tried to make yourself smaller for anyone. I want to build a life with you here on this land if you'll have me." Tears welled in Gabriella's eyes. "Mason, I've already added your name to the deed," he continued. Whether you say yes or no, half of this ranch is yours. I want you to know I'm serious about my intentions." "You're giving me half your property before I've even answered." Gabriella was stunned. "I'm an optimist," Mason grinned. "But more importantly, I respect you enough to ensure you have independence, regardless of your answer. So, Gabriella Cooper, will you marry me and help me build something lasting here?" Gabriella looked at this man kneeling before her, this man who had seen her, truly seen her, from the first moment they met, who had never once made her feel that her height was anything but perfect. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Mason, I will marry you." He rose to his feet and wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he reached up to cup her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "I should tell you," he said when they finally broke apart, "that I had an ulterior motive in choosing this ranch. The ceilings in the house are unusually high. Old man Henderson's wife was apparently quite tall herself." Gabriella laughed through her tears. "Is that so?" "Yes, madam. And the door frames are all extra tall, no ducking required for either of us." His eyes softened. "I want you to be comfortable in our home, Gabriella, in every way. Our home," she repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." They sat together on the boulder, planning their future as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Mason wanted a December wedding before winter set in fully. "We can invite the whole town," he suggested. "Show them what a perfect match we make." Gabriella leaned against his shoulder. "Do you really think we're a perfect match?" "I do, and not just because you're tall and I don't mind looking up." He kissed the top of her head. "We balance each other. Your thoughtfulness tempers my impulsiveness. My optimism brightens your practical nature. Together, we're better than we are apart." As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Gabriella felt a lightness she'd never experienced before. All her life, she'd been made to feel that her height was an impediment to finding love. Yet here was Mason, who not only accepted her as she was but celebrated it. News of their engagement spread quickly through Kingman. Most reactions were positive. Mason had made a good impression in his short time in town, and many were genuinely happy to see Gabriella find happiness. A few, of course, expressed surprise at the match, particularly at the speed with which it had developed. "Are you certain you're not rushing into this?" Louisa asked when Gabriella shared the news. "Marriage is a serious commitment." "I've never been more certain of anything," Gabriella replied. "When you know, you know. And I know Mason is the man I want to spend my life with." Preparations for the wedding consumed the next 2 months. Gabriella created her own wedding dress, ivory satin with intricate beadwork that took weeks to complete. Mason invited his few remaining relatives from back east, though only a cousin from St. Louis was able to make the journey. Gabriella had no family left, but the townspeople of Kingman had become her extended family over the years. December 15, 1883, dawned bright and cold. Gabriella dressed with Louis's help, her fingers trembling with excitement rather than nerves. "You are radiant," Louisa said, adjusting the simple veil over Gabriella's upswept hair. "Mason won't know what hit him." The ceremony was held in the town's church, decorated with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. As Gabriella walked down the aisle alone, she held her head high, meeting the gaze of each person she passed. Some had known her all her life, had witnessed her struggles and triumphs, had seen her stand tall literally and figuratively in the face of societal expectations. And at the end of that aisle stood Mason, watching her approach with such adoration in his eyes that Gabriella's breath caught. He was looking up at her, had always looked up at her not with discomfort or resentment, but with genuine love and appreciation. Reverend Thompson conducted a brief but heartfelt ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Mason's voice rang clear and confident through the church. I, Mason Fitzgerald, take you, Gabriella Cooper, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish your strength, admire your grace, and love every inch of you, all 76 of them, for as long as we both shall live. A ripple of affectionate laughter went through the congregation at his reference to her height. Gabriella's own vows were equally personal. I, Gabriella Cooper, take you, Mason Fitzgerald, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side, though slightly above it, through all of life's challenges and joys, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to love you with my whole heart until death parts us. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Mason pulled Gabriella close for their first kiss as a married couple. The church erupted in applause, led enthusiastically by Louisa in the front pew. The reception was held in the town hall, transformed once again for a celebration. A feast had been prepared by the women of Kingman, with Mrs. Hollister's famous roast beef as the centerpiece. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, as the winter sun set early outside the windows. Late in the evening, Mason and Gabriella departed for Fitzgerald Station in a wagon decorated with ribbons and bells by Mason's ranch hands. The temperature had dropped considerably, and Gabriella was grateful for the thick quilt Mason wrapped around them both for the journey. "Are you happy, Mrs. Fitzgerald?" Mason asked as they left the lights of town behind. "Immeasurably so, Mr. Fitzgerald," she replied, nestling against his shoulder. "Though I may keep Cooper for my seamstress business. Gabriella Cooper Fitzgerald has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I think it sounds perfect." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Just like you." Their first night as husband and wife was spent in the master bedroom of their ranch house, now fully furnished with a bed large enough to accommodate Gabriella's height comfortably. Mason had thought of everything, even commissioning a local carpenter to build a bed frame 2 feet longer than standard. In the days that followed, they settled into life together at Fitzgerald Station. Gabriella continued her seamstress work, converting one of the spare bedrooms into a sewing room with large windows that provided excellent light. Mason threw himself into expanding his cattle operation, often returning home tired but satisfied with the day's progress. Winter in the Arizona Territory could be harsh, with cold nights and occasional snowfall, but their house remained warm and cozy. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Mason reading aloud from one of his books while Gabriella worked on her latest sewing project. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories from their pasts or dreams for their future. "I'd like children," Mason said one such evening in January. "If you're amenable." Gabriella looked up from her embroidery. "I'd like that too, though they'll likely be tall." "I certainly hope so," Mason grinned. "Tall, strong, and as beautiful as their mother." Spring arrived early that year. By March, wildflowers were indeed carpeting the south pasture as Mason had promised, turning the landscape into a riot of color. The cattle thrived under Mason's care, and the first calves of the season were born healthy and strong. Gabriella's business prospered as well. Word of her skill had spread beyond Kingman, and she began receiving commissions from as far away as Prescott and Flagstaff. She hired a young woman from town to help with simpler projects, teaching her the same skills Gabriella's mother had once taught her. In April, Gabriella discovered she was expecting their first child. When she told Mason, he lifted her off her feet in a joyous embrace, spinning her around in the middle of their kitchen. "Put me down, you fool," she laughed. "I'm already dizzy enough with this baby making itself known." Mason set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "A baby," he said in wonder, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due in November, according to my calculations," Gabriella said, "just in time for Thanksgiving." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot Arizona summer. Gabriella's tall frame carried the child well, and she remained active around the ranch until well into her third trimester. Mason, meanwhile, hovered like a mother hen, insisting she rest frequently and recruiting one of the ranch hands' wives to help with household tasks. "I'm pregnant, not infirm," Gabriella protested when he tried to stop her from hanging freshly laundered curtains in early October. "Humor me," Mason replied, taking the curtains from her hands. "I just want to take care of you both." On a crisp November morning, Gabriella went into labor. Mason rode like the wind to fetch the midwife from town, returning with not only the midwife but also Louisa, who insisted on being present for her friend. After 12 hours of labor, Gabriella gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair like his father's. They named him James Thomas Fitzgerald James after Mason's father and Thomas after Gabriella's. "He's perfect," Mason whispered, cradling his son with tears in his eyes. "Look what we made, Gabriella." "He's going to be tall," the midwife predicted, measuring the baby's unusually long limbs. "Takes after his mother." "And his father," Gabriella added, smiling at Mason. "A perfect combination of us both." Life at Fitzgerald Station took on a new rhythm with James's arrival. The days were fuller, the nights sometimes shorter, but the joy he brought to their lives was immeasurable. Mason proved to be a devoted father, often carrying James around the ranch in a sling, pointing out cattle and horses to the wide-eyed infant. As James grew, so did the ranch. Mason's hard work and business acumen paid off, and by the time their son was walking, Fitzgerald Station had tripled its cattle and added a small horse breeding operation. Gabriella's seamstress business continued to thrive, though she scaled back her commissions to focus more on family life. James was indeed growing to be tall like his parents. By his second birthday, he stood head and shoulders above other children his age, with Gabriella's auburn hair and Mason's thoughtful gray eyes. It was around this time that Gabriella discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought renewed joy to the household, and preparations began for the new addition to the family. "I hope it's a girl this time," Mason said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James playing with wooden blocks at their feet. "A tall, beautiful girl like her mother." "You and your fascination with height," Gabriella teased. "What if this one takes after your mother's side? You said they were all of average height." "Then we'll love her or him just the same," Mason said, reaching for her hand. "Though I maintain there's something special about having to reach up for a kiss." Their daughter, Catherine Louise Fitzgerald, was born in the spring of 1887. Unlike her brother, Catherine was of average length at birth, though the midwife was quick to point out that many tall women had been small babies. "She has your eyes," Mason said, gazing down at the newborn with her bright blue eyes. "She's going to break hearts someday." "Let's not marry her off just yet," Gabriella laughed. "She's not even a day old." The family of 4 settled into a happy routine. James, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. Catherine, for her part, grew into a curious, bright child who did indeed begin to show signs of inheriting her mother's height by the time she was 2. Life on the ranch was good. The house expanded along with the family, with Mason adding a nursery wing when Catherine was born and plans for more bedrooms as the children grew. Gabriella's sewing room became a place where both children loved to visit, playing with scraps of colorful fabric while their mother worked. In the spring of 1890, when James was 6 and Catherine 3, Mason surprised Gabriella with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their marriage. "The children will stay with Louisa and her husband," he explained as Gabriella packed their trunks. "It's only for 2 weeks. I want to show you the city, take you to the theater, spoil you a little." "You spoil me every day," Gabriella said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You deserve it," he replied simply. "Besides, it's almost our wedding anniversary. 7 years deserves a special celebration." San Francisco was everything Gabriella had imagined and more. The bustling city, the ocean views, the elegant hotels and restaurants, all were a far cry from their quiet life in Kingman. Yet as much as she enjoyed the excursion, she found herself missing the open spaces of the ranch and most of all their children. "Ready to go home?" Mason asked on their final night as they strolled along the waterfront after dinner. "Yes," Gabriella admitted. "As beautiful as this is, Fitzgerald Station is where my heart belongs." "Mine too." Mason squeezed her hand. "Though I wouldn't mind bringing the children here someday when they're a bit older. Show them there's a whole world beyond Arizona territory." The return to Kingman was joyous, with James and Catherine running to meet their parents as the stage pulled into town. Louisa reported that both children had been perfect angels, a report Mason accepted with a grain of salt, knowing his son's penchant for mischief. Life continued its pleasant rhythm as the years passed. James grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy with his father's aptitude for ranching and his mother's eye for detail. Catherine, true to predictions, shot up like a weed, nearly matching her brother's height by the time she was 8, though she remained more delicately built than Gabriella. In 1893, Gabriella gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Robert Allen. Unlike his siblings, Bobby was a quiet baby, content to observe the world from the safety of his mother's arms or his father's broad shoulders. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, the days were full and satisfying. Gabriella continued her seamstress work on a limited basis, taking only the most interesting commissions and focusing primarily on creating clothing for her rapidly growing children. Mason had become one of the most respected ranchers in the territory, known for his fair business practices and quality livestock. As the children grew older, education became a priority. James and Catherine initially attended the school in Kingman, boarding with Louisa during the week and returning to the ranch on weekends. When Bobby reached school age, Mason hired a live-in tutor for all 3 children, converting one of the downstairs rooms into a proper schoolroom. "I want them to have every advantage," he explained to Gabriella. "James shows real promise in mathematics and Catherine has your artistic eye. Bobby, well, he's still finding his path, but he's sharp as a tack." By the turn of the century, Fitzgerald Station had grown into one of the largest and most prosperous ranches in northern Arizona. The original 500 acres had expanded to nearly 2,000, with grazing rights on adjacent government land. The main house had been enlarged twice to accommodate the growing family and frequent guests, and a bunkhouse provided comfortable quarters for the dozen permanent ranch hands. James, now 16 and every bit as tall as his father, worked alongside Mason, learning every aspect of the cattle business. Catherine, 13 and already taller than many grown women, showed a talent for design, often collaborating with Gabriella on sewing projects. 10-year-old Bobby, still smaller than his siblings had been at his age but quick-witted and observant, had developed an interest in the natural world, collecting specimens of desert plants and animals for study. In the spring of 1901, as Gabriella and Mason approached their 18th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. Did you ever imagine our life would turn out this way?" Gabriella asked, her head resting on Mason's shoulder. At 48, his hair was streaked with silver, but he remained as handsome as the day she'd met him in Jenkins' store. "Not in my wildest dreams," Mason admitted. "I hoped for a good life when I came to Kingman, but the children, this land, it's beyond anything I could have hoped for. Even with a wife who's taller than you," she teased, an old joke between them now. Mason turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. At 43, Gabriella's auburn hair had a few strands of silver as well, but her blue eyes were as bright as ever, and she still stood straight and proud at her full height. "Especially with a wife who's taller than me," he said seriously. "The day I walked into that store and saw you standing there like a queen among commoners was the luckiest day of my life. I looked up at you and thought, finally, someone I can reach for, and I've been reaching for you ever since, Gabriella. Every single day. And I've been reaching back," she whispered, leaning down to kiss him softly. Inside the house, they could hear James and Catherine arguing good-naturedly over a game of chess while Bobby read aloud from his latest book of natural history. The sounds of their children, the vast expanse of land that was their legacy, the life they had built together, all of it felt like a dream fulfilled. As darkness fell over Fitzgerald Station, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a woman who believed her height made her unlovable to the matriarch of a thriving family and ranch, her path had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. And it had all begun with a tall woman, a cowboy who looked up, and the courage to reach for love.